wind screamed across the Wyoming plains like a wounded beast, dragging with it sheets of snow that bit into skin and bone. The horizon had vanished hours ago, swallowed whole by the blizzard that turned every landmark into a ghostly blur. Inside the storm trudged a man, broad-shouldered, coat flapping, hat pulled low, a rancher named Clay Mercer, known across the valley for his silence as much as his strength. He was a man who had lost the sound of laughter the day the earth claimed his wife and son in a barn fire 2 winters ago. Since then, he'd spoken little, worked much, and lived only for the cattle that depended on him. But that night, as he forced his horse through the storm toward the northern ridge, he heard something, a faint cry, half human, half wind. He stopped. "Probably coyotes," he muttered, though his voice came out cracked and used to speaking. But then he heard it again, clearer this time. A child's cry. He dismounted, pushing through the knee-deep snow, his lantern swinging, his boots sinking. The light caught movement near a fallen pine. And there, huddled beneath its branches, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 16. Her thin dress torn, her hair frozen in clumps, her hands trembling around a small bundle that looked like a broken satchel. Her lips moved, but no sound came out until he knelt beside her. "Sir, can I?" she whispered, her voice barely a thread. "Can I slip under your coat?" Clay froze, not because of the words, but because of the fear in her eyes. It wasn't shame or weakness, it was the kind of fear only people who have lost everything know. He said nothing for a long second. Then, without a word, he unbuttoned his heavy sheepskin coat and pulled her close, wrapping the warmth around her frail shoulders. She trembled violently, her teeth chattering against his chest. "You'll freeze to death out here," he muttered, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed no more than snow itself. His horse snorted nervously as Clay climbed back into the saddle, clutching her close. 4 miles. The only sound was wind, hooves, and the faint beat of a heart that seemed to slow with every gust. When they reached his cabin, a lone structure crouched beneath the shadow of the ridge. Clay shouldered the door open with a grunt. He set her by the fire, his hands moving automatically, tossing logs, striking matches, boiling water. The girl sat, silent, her eyes following every motion. "Name," he finally asked, without looking up. She hesitated. "Annie," she whispered. "Annie Rowe." "Where from?" He pressed, his tone flat but not unkind. Her eyes filled with tears. "Don't know any more. We were on a wagon. My pa, he..." Her voice broke, and she clutched her knees. Clay didn't ask again. He recognized grief when he saw it. He poured her a mug of hot broth, watched her hands shake as she drank, watched her shoulders start to lose their stiffness. He could tell she hadn't eaten in days. He gave her bread, a blanket, and turned away so she wouldn't see his eyes soften. "You ain't safe wandering alone," he said quietly. "Storm's gonna bury the trail by dawn. You'll stay here till it breaks." She nodded, then looked at him with a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. "Why'd you stop?" she asked softly. Clay stared at the flames. Didn't seem right to keep riding. That night, while the storm beat against the cabin walls, Annie lay curled near the hearth, and Clay sat at the table, pretending to mend a saddle strap he didn't care about. Every few minutes, he found himself glancing toward her, her fragile figure, her labored breathing, and memories of another small body filled his chest like a wound reopening. His boy had been just about her age when the fire took him. The smell of smoke, the sound of his wife's scream, it all came back in waves until his hands trembled. He clenched his jaw, forcing the ghosts away. "You got folks?" he asked finally. Annie's eyes fluttered open. "No more," she said. "Ma died last spring. Pa was trying to get us to Montana for work. Then the storm hit. Wagon overturned near the creek. He went out to find help but never came back." Her words fell like quiet stones in the room. Clay felt something inside him twist, a mix of guilt and anger at the world's cruelty. "You'll rest," he said simply. "We'll figure things come morning." But the storm didn't break by morning. Nor the next day. Or the one after that. For 3 days, snow buried the valley, cutting them off from everything. Clay rationed the food, taught her how to keep the fire going. How to melt snow for water. She tried to help, but her hands were still weak. Once, when she nearly spilled the pot, she flinched as if expecting to be struck. Clay noticed and paused. "Ain't no one here gonna hurt you, Annie," he said, voice firm but gentle. Her eyes widened, then softened. "You sound like my pa," she whispered. He turned away again. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Over time, the silence between them changed. It wasn't heavy anymore, it was warm. They spoke little. But each gesture said what words couldn't. When she laughed for the first time at his old dog, trying to chase his own tail, Clay felt something break loose inside him. Something that had been frozen as long as the land outside. He didn't know what to call it, but it felt a lot like hope. One evening, when the snow finally stopped, Annie stood by the window, watching the fading storm light. "Sir," she said quietly. "You saved my life." Clay didn't answer, just kept oiling his rifle. "I owe you everything." He looked up then, meeting her gaze. "You don't owe me a thing. Just live better than what's behind you." She smiled faintly. "What about you?" He hesitated, the question catching him off guard. "I reckon I'm still figuring that part out." That night, while she slept, Clay walked outside beneath a sky littered with stars. The snow glowed pale and silent. For the first time in years, he whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for the girl sleeping safe inside. Maybe God had sent her to remind him he wasn't done yet. Maybe saving her was the same as saving what little was left of his soul. The next morning, the valley was calm, the air crisp and clear. Clay saddled the horse and loaded supplies. "Where we going?" Annie asked. "Town," he said. "You got kin?" "We'll find someone to take you in proper." She frowned. "You want me to leave?" Clay paused, his throat tightening. "Ain't about what I want. It's what's right." She looked down. Silent for a long moment, then whispered, "Sir. Before we go, can I?" She hesitated. Stepping closer, eyes glistening, "Can I slip under your coat? Just one more time." He froze again, just as he had that first night. The words hitting something deep and wordless inside him. Then he nodded slowly, opening his arms. She stepped into the warmth, her small frame pressing against his chest. For a moment, there was no snow, no ghosts. No loss, only the steady beat of two hearts that had survived the storm. "You'll be all right now," he said quietly. She nodded against him. "So will you." As they rode toward town later, Clay didn't look back at the cabin. But deep down, he knew he'd left behind something colder than snow, and carried forward something worth living. For the sun rose slow over the white hills, bleeding gold through the frostbitten air as Clay, Mercer and Annie rode down toward town. The snow crunching beneath the hooves like brittle glass. For the first time in days, the world wasn't howling. It was whispering, quiet, cautious. Like it was afraid to wake something that had just begun to heal. Clay kept his eyes ahead, but his thoughts were behind him. Tangled between the ghosts of his burned barn and the laughter that had just begun to fill his cabin again. Annie sat behind him, wrapped in his old blanket. Her chin resting lightly on his shoulder as the wind brushed her face. She hadn't spoken since they left. And Clay didn't press her. Some silences are better left alone. Until they're ready to speak. When they reached the ridge overlooking Red Creek, the town looked almost peaceful from afar, but Clay knew better. Behind those wooden storefronts and painted windows were people with long memories and short tempers. And a stranger, especially one like Annie, was bound to draw questions. He guided the horse slow through the main street, eyes darting to faces that peered out from shop doors and frosted windows. "Mercer," a voice called, deep and coarse. It was Sheriff Tom Leland, his old friend from the war. Standing outside the general store, pipe clenched in his teeth. "You've been ghosting that ranch of yours again." Clay gave a slow nod. "Storm kept me in." The sheriff's eyes shifted to Annie. Curious but not cruel. "Who's the girl?" Clay hesitated, and Annie gripped his coat tighter. "Found her near the ridge. Wagon turned over. Lost her folks." Leland's face softened. "Another soul lost to winter, huh? Poor kid." He turned to her. "You're safe here, miss. We'll see you right." Annie gave a small nod, eyes darting between them. Clay dismounted, helped her down, and handed the reins to the hitch post. "I'll get her food and a room at the inn," he said quietly. But Annie's hand caught his sleeve. "You'll come back?" she asked, voice trembling. "Just need to see the blacksmith," Clay replied, forcing a faint smile. "Won't be long." Yet even as he said it, something in his chest twisted. He wasn't used to anyone needing him, not since his wife. As he stepped away, he heard her whisper to herself, "Don't leave me behind too." He froze mid-step, his breath catching. Because those were almost the exact words his son had cried the night of the fire. He turned slightly, seeing her face half hidden under the brim of his coat. And something in him cracked all over again. "I won't," he said quietly, and meant it. Inside the inn, Clay paid the keeper for a room. Told him to send up warm soup and clean clothes. The man nodded but couldn't hide the curiosity burning in his eyes. "That girl kin to you, Mercer?" Clay shook his head. "Just someone the storm left behind." "Storms leave a lot behind," the man muttered. "Sometimes they bring what we need, though." Clay didn't answer, but the words lingered. He left Annie settled, promising to return by dusk. Then headed toward the smithy on the far end of town. But the moment he stepped inside, he knew something was off. 3 men were waiting, dusty coats, hard eyes. The kind that carried trouble like a second skin. "You Mercer?" one of them barked. Clay said nothing, but his hand instinctively brushed the butt of his revolver. "We're looking for a wagon train that broke north. Heard one went missing in the storm. Belonged to the Rowe family, men owed us money. Big money." Clay's eyes narrowed. "The girl with me's Annie Rowe," he said cautiously. "Her pa didn't make it." The men spat on the floor. "Figures. He ran from his debts. Girl's his blood, she pays what's owed." Clay stepped forward. Voice low but sharp. "She's a child. You got business, you take it up with me." The men sneered. "You ain't her kin, old man." "Don't stick your nose," he didn't finish. Clay's fist hit him hard across the jaw, sending him sprawling into the forge ash. The others reached for their guns. But the blacksmith's hammer hit the counter like thunder. "Not in my shop," the smith growled. The men backed off, glaring, but one leaned close to Clay as he passed. "This ain't over, Mercer. We'll collect." Clay watched them ride off, jaw tight, then exhaled slowly. Trouble had a way of finding him, even when he tried to live quiet. By the time he returned to the inn, the sky was gray again. The smell of more snow in the air. Annie was sitting by the window. Wearing a borrowed shawl, her eyes wide when she saw him. "You came back," she whispered. "Told you I would." She smiled, and for the first time, he realized how much she'd changed in just a few days, the color in her cheeks, the steadiness in her voice. "You look better," he said softly. "Feel better," she replied. Then her expression fell. "But those men downstairs. They asked about me." Clay's gut tightened. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. But they looked angry." He crossed the room, checked the window. Outside, 3 horses waited in the alley. "Pack your things," he said calmly. "We're leaving." "Leaving? But where?" "Home." She blinked. "You mean your ranch?" He nodded. "Safer there." They slipped out the back as the storm began again. Snow falling in thick, lazy flakes that muffled the world. Clay led her through the woods, avoiding the main road. His instincts honed from years of solitude and danger. They reached the cabin by nightfall, both exhausted. As he shut the door, Annie turned to him. "Why'd you do all this for me?" she asked. "You didn't even know me." Clay hesitated, then knelt to stoke the fire. "Maybe because I remember what it's like to be left behind." She stared at him, eyes shining. "You lost someone too?" He nodded slowly. "Wife. Son. Fire took M. I wasn't there to save M." The confession came out like a sigh. Years in the making. Annie stepped closer. "Maybe you couldn't save them then," she said softly, "but you saved me now. That has to count for something." Clay met her eyes. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't look away. The cabin filled with the quiet hum of the wind and the crackle of firelight. Two broken souls, stitched together by the same cold world. Finding warmth not in words but in the space between them. That night, they didn't sleep much. Clay sat by the window with his rifle ready, watching for riders, while Annie rested wrapped in the coat that had become her shelter from everything cruel. Sometime past midnight, she stirred and whispered, "Sir, if they come for me, will you let them take me?" Clay's hand tightened around the rifle. "Over my dead body." She smiled faintly, whispering, "Then I'm not afraid anymore." Outside, the snow thickened, erasing tracks. Muffling sound, nature's own way of protecting them. By dawn, the threat had passed. The men never found the cabin, and by spring, the law caught them trying to shake down another rancher. Sheriff Leland sent word, the road debt was cleared, the men were gone for good. Clay read the note in silence, then looked toward the barn, where Annie was laughing as she fed the horses. He hadn't heard laughter like that since his boy. As weeks turned to months, the ranch began to change. The once empty rooms filled with color and noise, Annie humming as she cooked, her voice floating through the house like sunlight after rain. Clay found himself smiling more, speaking more, even singing once when he thought no one was listening. "You're different," Annie teased one afternoon, tossing hay into the stalls. "Used to be all grumpy silence." "Still am," Clay said, half grinning. "You just talk too much to notice." She laughed. A sound so bright it made even the horses twitch their ears. By the time summer came, Red Creek folks started talking again. Some said Mercer had taken in an orphan. Others whispered the girl had thawed the coldest heart in the valley. Clay didn't care what they said. All he knew was that for the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel like a graveyard, it felt like home. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Annie stood beside him on the porch, watching the light spill over the fields. "Sir," she said softly, "you ever think God lets storms happen just to push us where we need to be?" Clay thought for a long moment before answering. "Maybe. Maybe he knows we don't move less he makes us." She smiled. "Then I guess I'm glad the storm found me." Clay looked at her, his weathered face softening. "Me too, Annie. Me too." As the wind rolled gently across the grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers, the silent rancher finally understood, he hadn't saved her. She had saved him. The story of two souls lost in winter, finding warmth not in the fire but in each other's strength, wasn't about rescue anymore, it was about rebirth. And for every listener who hears their tale, remember this: kindness costs nothing, but it can rebuild everything.